Texts, The Double-Edged Sword of Dependency, Lessons from Kissinger's Wisdom in Personal, Family, and Global Contexts. Henry Kissinger, the renowned diplomat and political scientist, once remarked, "It is difficult to be an enemy of America, but fatal to be its friend." While this statement was made in the context of international relations, its underlying truth resonates deeply in our personal lives, relationships, and communities. The idea that dependency on a powerful entity, whether a nation, a person, or an institution, can be both beneficial and perilous, is a universal truth. This blog post will explore how Kissinger's insight applies to various levels of human experience: personal relationships, family dynamics, community interactions, and even global geopolitics. Through examples and instances, we'll uncover the delicate balance between reliance and independence. 1. Personal relationships. The risk of emotional dependency. In personal relationships, dependency can be both a source of strength and vulnerability. Consider the story of Sarah and John, a couple deeply in love. Sarah relied heavily on John for emotional support, financial stability, and decision-making. While this dynamic worked initially, it became problematic when John's priorities shifted due to career pressures. Sarah, who had built her life around John's presence, felt abandoned and lost. Her dependency, once a source of comfort, became a liability. Kissinger's statement mirrors this scenario. Being a friend or dependent partner can be rewarding, but it becomes fatal when the balance of power shifts. Sarah's story teaches us the importance of maintaining individuality and self-reliance, even in the closest relationships. Emotional interdependence is healthy, but over-reliance can lead to vulnerability when circumstances change too. Family dynamics. The pitfalls of over-reliance. Families are often the first institutions where we learn about dependency. Take the example of a traditional family in a small Indian village. The eldest son, Raj, was expected to support his parents and siblings financially. While this arrangement worked for years, it became unsustainable when Raj lost his job. The family, which had depended entirely on him, struggled to adapt. Their over-reliance on Raj left them unprepared for adversity. This mirrors Kissinger's observation. Being a friend or dependent in a family structure can be comforting, but it becomes dangerous when the primary supporter falters. Families, like nations, must foster resilience by encouraging each member to contribute and grow independently. 3. Community and village life. The danger of monolithic support. In rural communities, dependency on a single industry or benefactor can be risky. Consider a farming village in Kenya that relied entirely on coffee exports. When global coffee prices plummeted, the entire village faced economic collapse. Their dependency on a single crop, while profitable in good times, proved fatal when market conditions changed. Similarly, in a small town in Italy, the community depended heavily on a local factory for employment. When the factory closed, the town's economy crumbled. These examples illustrate how dependency on a single source of support, whether agricultural or industrial, can be devastating when that support disappears. Kissinger's wisdom reminds us that diversification and self-sufficiency are crucial for long-term stability. 4. City life. The illusion of urban security. Cities often symbolize progress and opportunity, but they also breed dependency. Take the example of Maria, a young professional in New York City. She relied on her high-paying job, expensive apartment, and social connections to define her identity. When she was laid off during an economic downturn, Maria realized how fragile her sense of security was. Her dependency on her job and lifestyle left her vulnerable when circumstances changed. Cities, like powerful nations, offer immense opportunities but demand self-reliance. Those who become too dependent on urban systems, whether economic, social, or infrastructural, risk being left stranded when those systems fail. Kissinger's insight serves as a reminder to cultivate resilience, even in the most bustling metropolises. 5. State and national levels, the perils of political dependency. At the state and national levels, Kissinger's statement finds its most direct application. Consider the relationship between the United States and its allies during the Cold War. Countries like South Korea and Japan benefited immensely from American protection and economic aid. However, this dependency also made them vulnerable to shifts in U.S. policy. For instance, when the U.S. withdrew support from South Vietnam, the consequences were catastrophic. Similarly, smaller nations that rely heavily on larger powers for economic or military support often find themselves at the mercy of their benefactors. This dynamic is not limited to the U.S., it applies to any dominant power from China to Russia. Kissinger's observation underscores the importance of strategic independence, even in alliances. 6. Global context, the fragility of international friendships. On a global scale, Kissinger's statement reflects the delicate nature of international relationships. Consider the European Union, EU, a union of nations that rely on each other for economic and political stability. While this interdependence has brought peace and prosperity, it has also created vulnerabilities. The Brexit referendum, for example, exposed the risks of over-reliance on a centralized system. The UK's decision to leave the EU sent shockwaves through the continent, highlighting the fragility of such alliances. Similarly, developing nations that depend on foreign aid or investment often face challenges when donor priorities shift. For instance, when Western nations reduced aid to African countries in the 1990s, many economies struggled to adapt. These examples illustrate how dependency, while beneficial in the short term, can be perilous in the long run. 7. Lessons for life, balancing dependency and independence. Kissinger's statement is a timeless reminder of the importance of balance. Whether in personal relationships, family dynamics, community structures, or global alliances, dependency can be both a blessing and a curse. Here are some key lessons we can draw. 1. Cultivate self-reliance. While it's natural to rely on others, it's essential to maintain your own independence. This applies to emotional, financial, and professional aspects of life. 2. Diversify support systems. Just as nations diversify their economies, individuals and communities should diversify their sources of support. This reduces vulnerability to external shocks. 3. Adapt to change. Life is unpredictable. Those who adapt to changing circumstances are more likely to thrive. Flexibility and resilience are key. 4. Build equitable relationships. Whether in friendships, business partnerships, or international alliances, strive for relationships based on mutual respect and shared benefits, not dependency. Conclusion: the universal truth of Kissinger's wisdom. Henry Kissinger's statement transcends geopolitics, offering profound insights into the human condition. From personal relationships to global alliances, the dynamics of dependency and power play out in strikingly similar ways. By understanding these dynamics, we can navigate life's complexities with greater wisdom and resilience. Whether you're a villager in Kenya, a professional in New York, or a nation-state on the world stage, the lesson is clear. Dependency can be comforting, but independence is empowering. Strive for balance, and you'll be better equipped to face whatever challenges come your way. This blog post serves as a reminder that Kissinger's wisdom is not just about nations, it's about us, our families, our communities, and our world. Let's take these lessons to heart and build lives that are both connected and resilient. I'll explore how Kissinger's statement about international relations can apply to personal life across different social scales. This will be a detailed analysis with examples from various contexts. Power dynamics in personal relationships. The Kissinger principle. Henry Kissinger's famous statement, "It is difficult to be an enemy of America, but fatal to be its friend," was originally made in the context of geopolitical alliances and American foreign policy. However, this provocative observation contains wisdom that extends far beyond international relations. At its core, this statement reflects a fundamental truth about power dynamics, dependency, and the potential dangers of aligning too closely with powerful entities or individuals. In this exploration, we'll examine how this principle manifests across the entire spectrum of human relationships, from intimate personal connections to community dynamics, and from local politics to global affairs. The personal sphere. Intimate relationships and friendships. The danger of emotional dependency. In our most intimate relationships, becoming overly dependent on a partner who holds more emotional, financial, or social power can create dangerous vulnerabilities. Case study. Sarah and James. Sarah, a talented graphic designer, gradually gave up freelance opportunities to support her husband James's career as he climbed the corporate ladder. She became financially dependent, let her professional network atrophy, and centered her identity around being James's wife. When James unexpectedly left the relationship for a colleague, Sarah found herself not just heartbroken, but without financial resources, professional connections, or even a clear sense of personal identity. This dynamic demonstrates how being a friend, in this case, a supportive spouse who sacrifices their own interests, can become fatal to one's autonomy and well-being when the power dynamic is severely imbalanced. Friendships and social circles. Even in friendships, the Kissinger principle can emerge in subtle ways. Example, the social hierarchy. Consider a high school social group with a charismatic popular leader. Those who become the leader's close friends often 1. Modify their behavior to maintain the friendship. 2. Defend the leader's actions even when questionable. 3. Risk their own reputations to maintain proximity to power. 4. May be quickly discarded when they're no longer useful. Meanwhile, those who maintain independence or even position themselves as mild opponents often preserve their autonomy and eventually build more sustainable social connections. Family dynamics, the microcosm of power. The favored child phenomenon. Within families, we often see the Kissinger principle play out in parent-child relationships. Example, the golden child versus the scapegoat. In some dysfunctional family systems, one child becomes the golden child, the friend of the power structure, while another becomes the scapegoat, the enemy. Counterintuitively, the golden child often faces greater long-term challenges. They develop an identity dependent on parental approval. They struggle to develop independent decision-making skills. They may sacrifice their authentic desires to maintain their status. When family dynamics shift, they experience a profound identity crisis. Meanwhile, the scapegoat, while facing more obvious difficulties, often develops resilience, independence, and a stronger sense of self, making it difficult, but not fatal, to be in the opposition position. Extended family power structures. In extended families, especially those with significant family businesses or wealth, we see similar patterns emerge. Case study. The Martinez family business. In the Martinez family's restaurant chain, those relatives who became too dependent on the patriarch's favor received short-term benefits, easy promotions, financial support, but failed to develop independent skills. When the patriarch died and the business restructured, these family members struggled significantly, while more independent relatives adapted and thrived. Community level, neighborhood and local organizations, community leadership and dependency. Local communities and neighborhood associations often develop their own power dynamics that reflect the Kissinger principle. Example, the neighborhood association. In the Oak Ridge neighborhood, those who aligned closely with the powerful association president received preferential treatment for home improvement approvals and community resources. However, when a scandal led to the president's resignation, these friends found themselves targeted by resentful neighbors who had been treated unfairly. Meanwhile, residents who had maintained polite but distant relationships with the leadership weathered the transition with minimal disruption. Religious and community organizations. Similar dynamics play out in religious congregations, volunteer organizations, and other community groups. Case study: First Baptist Church leadership transition. When Pastor Johnson retired after 30 years, church members who had tied their entire social and spiritual identity to his leadership experienced a profound crisis. Some had gained influence by being the pastor's closest allies, but found themselves marginalized under new leadership. Those who had maintained a balanced approach to church involvement adapted more successfully to the transition. Village and town dynamics, small-scale politics, small-town business relationships. In small towns, the interconnection between business and personal relationships creates complex dependencies. Example: Main Street in Millfield. In Millfield, population 5,000. Business owners who became too closely aligned with the mayor's economic development plans received short-term benefits but faced backlash when those plans failed. Meanwhile, businesses that maintained independence were able to adapt more quickly to changing economic conditions. Local political alliances. The rise and fall of local political figures illustrates how being a friend to power can become problematic. Case study: The fall of Mayor Roberts. When Mayor Roberts of Centerville was indicted for corruption, his closest allies in the town council were also implicated, not because they participated in wrongdoing, but because they had tied their political identities to defending him. Meanwhile, council members who had maintained respectful opposition were positioned to lead the town's recovery. City level, urban power structures, urban development and powerful interests. In cities, the relationship between developers, politicians, and community groups demonstrates the Kissinger principle in action. Example: Riverside Development Project in Chicago. Community organizations that became too closely aligned with a major developer's promises for a riverside project found themselves unable to criticize when the developer scaled back affordable housing commitments. Organizations that maintained a more independent stance were able to effectively advocate for the community when the developer's priorities shifted. Professional networks and industry power players. Professional circles in major cities often revolve around influential figures whose favor can seem essential. Case study: The tech startup scene. In San Francisco's tech ecosystem, founders who built their entire network and strategy around access to a single prominent venture capitalist often found themselves vulnerable when that VC's investment thesis changed. Meanwhile, entrepreneurs who maintained diverse relationships and independence were better positioned to weather changes in the funding environment. State level, regional politics and industry. State political machines. The history of state politics in America provides clear examples of the dangers of becoming too dependent on powerful political figures. Example: The rise and fall of Governor Larson's coalition, Michigan. Governor Larson built a powerful political machine that delivered benefits to loyal supporters. When federal investigations led to his downfall, his closest allies who had received state contracts, appointments, and other favors faced legal scrutiny, reputation damage, and loss of livelihood. Political figures who had maintained principled independence while facing short-term disadvantages emerged unscathed. Regional industry dependency. States dominated by single industries also demonstrate how dependency can become problematic. Case study: Coal countries transition. In West Virginia, communities and politicians who tied their entire identity and economic strategy to being friends of the coal industry faced devastating consequences when market forces changed. Meanwhile, Regions that maintained a more diversified approach to development, while still respecting the industry's importance, adapted more successfully to energy transitions. National contexts, the Kissinger principle at home. Corporate-government relationships. Within nations, the relationship between corporations and government illustrates how being too close to power can backfire. Example: the automotive bailout fallout ***. During the 2008 to 2009 automotive industry crisis, car manufacturers who had become most dependent on government support faced the most stringent conditions and public backlash. Companies that had maintained more independence, while still facing difficulties, retained greater control over their future. Media organizations and power proximity. The media landscape provides clear examples of how proximity to power can compromise independence. Case study: the White House press corps. Journalists who become too close to their White House sources often gain short-term access, but lose credibility and independence. When administrations change, these reporters often struggle to adapt, while those who maintain professional distance preserve their effectiveness regardless of who holds power. International relations. Kissinger's original context. Small nations and superpower alliances. Returning to the international context, we see countless examples of Kissinger's principle in action. Example: Cold War proxy. States-nations that became entirely dependent on either American or Soviet support during the Cold War often suffered the most when superpower priorities shifted. Countries that maintained more independent foreign policies, while navigating difficult relationships with both superpowers, generally achieved more stable long-term outcomes. Modern economic dependencies. Today's global economic system creates similar vulnerabilities for nations that become too dependent on powerful economic partners. Case study: Belt and Road Initiative dependencies. Some nations that have embraced China's Belt and Road Initiative with little regard for maintaining economic diversity or sovereignty have found themselves with unsustainable debt and political complications. Meanwhile, countries that engaged with the initiative while maintaining other partnerships and economic independence have benefited without becoming fatally dependent. Philosophical reflections: the nature of power and dependency. The psychology of power relationships. At its core, the Kissinger principle reflects fundamental psychological truths about human relationships with power. The illusion of permanence. Those close to power often mistake temporary alignment of interests for permanent loyalty. 2. Identity fusion. Friends of power tend to merge their identity with the powerful entity, losing their independent value. 3. Skill atrophy. Dependency on a powerful patron leads to atrophy of the skills needed for independent survival. 4. Moral compromise. Proximity to power often requires incremental moral compromises that accumulate over time. The virtues of strategic independence. The wisdom in Kissinger's observation suggests that a middle path, neither enemy nor overly dependent friend, offers the most sustainable approach to dealing with power. 1. Maintain multiple relationships. Diversify your dependencies and connections. 2. Preserve core identity. Never allow your sense of self to become too tied to a relationship with power. 3. Develop independent capabilities. Continuously build skills that have value outside of any single relationship. 4. Practice principled engagement. Engage with powerful entities based on shared interests, not subservience. Kissinger's statement: "It is difficult to be an enemy of America, but fatal to be its friend," can also apply to private life, especially in relationships, friendships, and business. It reflects the idea that being too dependent on someone powerful can put you at risk when their priorities change. 1. Friendships. Social circles. Some people are tough to oppose, but even more dangerous to befriend. A powerful or influential friend might help you when it benefits them. But if their interests shift, they could betray or abandon you. Example: a person who befriends someone powerful at work might enjoy benefits at first, but if their friend falls from power or turns against them, they might suffer the consequences. 2. Business career. In corporate settings, aligning too closely with a powerful boss or mentor can be beneficial, but if they lose favor or get replaced, you might be discarded too. Example: an employee who rises by being close to an influential leader may lose everything if that leader is fired or turns against them. 3. Romantic relationships. A relationship built on one person's power or resources might feel secure, but if that person changes their mind, the dependent partner could be left vulnerable. Example: a person who sacrifices everything for a dominant partner might be abandoned once their usefulness is over. 4. Family loyalty conflicts. Being too loyal to a family member who has power or money can backfire if they suddenly cut you off or turn against you. Example: a family member who always helps others financially might later refuse, leaving the dependent relative struggling. Lesson in private life. Self-reliance is key. Don't become overly dependent on anyone's goodwill. Powerful people have their own interests. Their support is often conditional, not permanent. Strategic alliances versus blind loyalty. Be aware of when a friendship, business connection, or relationship is transactional rather than genuine. In short, Kissinger's wisdom applies to both global politics and personal life. Relying too much on someone with power can be a bigger risk than opposing them outright. Kissinger's statement: "It is difficult to be an enemy of America, but fatal to be its friend," can also apply to private life, especially in relationships, friendships, and business. It reflects the idea that being too dependent on someone powerful can put you at risk when their priorities change. Friendships, social circles. Some people are tough to oppose, but even more dangerous to befriend. A powerful or influential friend might help you when it benefits them, but if their interests shift, they could betray or abandon you. Example: a person who befriends someone powerful at work might enjoy benefits at first, but if their friend falls from power or turns against them, they might suffer the consequences. Business career. In corporate settings, aligning too closely with a powerful boss or mentor can be beneficial, but if they lose favor or get replaced, you might be discarded too. Example: an employee who rises by being close to an influential leader may lose everything if that leader is fired or turns against them. Romantic relationships. A relationship built on one person's power or resources might feel secure, but if that person changes their mind, the dependent partner could be left vulnerable. Example: a person who sacrifices everything for a dominant partner might be abandoned once their usefulness is over. Family loyalty conflicts. Being too loyal to a family member who has power or money can backfire if they suddenly cut you off or turn against you. Example: a family member who always helps others financially might later refuse, leaving the dependent relative struggling. Lesson in private life. Self-reliance is key. Don't become overly dependent on anyone's goodwill. Powerful people have their own interests. Their support is often conditional, not permanent. Strategic alliances versus blind loyalty. Be aware of when a friendship, business connection, or relationship is transactional rather than genuine. In short, Kissinger's wisdom applies to both global politics and personal life. Relying too much on someone with power can be a bigger risk than opposing them outright. The perils of dependency in relationships, friendships, and business. Henry Kissinger, a former U.S. Secretary of State, once famously remarked, "It is difficult to be an enemy of America, but fatal to be its friend." This statement has been interpreted as a commentary on the complexities of international relations and the dangerous allure of allying too closely with a powerful nation. However, this sentiment resonates beyond geopolitics, finding echoes in our personal lives, within families, communities, friendships, and business relationships. This blog post explores how Kissinger's paradox manifests in various aspects of our daily lives and offers insights into managing these intricate dynamics. Personal life, the dynamics of dependence and autonomy. In personal relationships, be they familial, romantic, or platonic, the balance between dependence and autonomy is crucial. Let's consider a few scenarios to illustrate this. Familial bonds. Imagine a family where one member, let's call her Jane, becomes the primary breadwinner after the untimely death of the parents. Her siblings, younger and still in school, become financially and emotionally dependent on her. Initially, Jane manages well, but as time goes by, the weight of responsibility becomes burdensome. Jane's siblings, now accustomed to her support, begin to struggle with independence. When Jane encounters her own life challenges, such as job loss or illness, the entire family's stability is threatened. This situation underscores the risk of overdependence. While Jane's support was vital, it also created a fragile system vulnerable to disruption. Romantic relationships. In romantic relationships, an imbalance of power can also lead to complications. Consider a couple where one partner, Alex, is exceptionally successful in their career, providing financially for the household, while the other partner, Sam, focuses on managing the home and children. As Alex's career demands more time, Sam becomes increasingly isolated and financially dependent. If Alex's priorities shift, perhaps towards a new job in a different city or a new relationship, the fallout can be devastating for Sam. This dynamic mirrors Kissinger's observation. Relying heavily on someone powerful can lead to vulnerability when their priorities change. Friendships. In friendships, the notion of dependence might seem less obvious, but it is equally significant. Think of a scenario where two friends, Mia and Lily, share an apartment. Mia, being more financially stable, pays the bulk of the rent and other expenses. Lily, grateful but feeling increasingly indebted, starts to feel uneasy about the imbalance. When Mia decides to move to another city for a job, Lily is left in a precarious situation, struggling to afford the apartment on her own. This example highlights how even well-intentioned support can lead to unintended dependency and subsequent challenges. Community dynamics, the power and pitfalls of influence. The dynamics of power and dependency extend to communities, where influential individuals or groups can profoundly impact collective well-being. Village and town life. In smaller communities like villages and towns, influential figures often hold significant sway. Picture a village where a wealthy landowner, Mr. Thompson, generously funds local infrastructure projects, schools, and healthcare. The villagers, benefiting from his largesse, become dependent on his continued support. When Mr. Thompson's business faces financial difficulties, the community's well-being is jeopardized. This scenario reflects the broader implications of Kissinger's statement. Dependency on a powerful benefactor can be perilous when their fortunes wane. City dynamics. In urban settings, the concentration of power and influence can be even more pronounced. Consider a city where a tech mogul, Miss Rodriguez, drives economic growth through her company, employing thousands and supporting numerous local businesses. The city's economy flourishes, but it becomes heavily reliant on her company's success. When a market downturn forces Miss Rodriguez to downsize her operations, the ripple effects devastate the local economy. This situation underscores the risks of tying a community's fortunes too closely to a single, powerful entity. Business relationships, the double-edged sword of strategic alliances. In the business world, strategic alliances with powerful partners can be both a boon and a bane. Small business and corporate giants. Consider a small business, Green Tech Solutions, that partners with a corporate giant, EcoCorp, to access new markets and resources. Initially, the partnership propels Green Tech Solutions to new heights. but over time, it becomes increasingly dependent on EcoCorp for contracts and resources. When EcoCorp decides to pivot its strategy and cut ties with green tech solutions, the smaller company faces a severe crisis. This example illustrates the double-edged sword of strategic alliances. While they offer growth opportunities, they can also lead to precarious dependency. Startups and venture capital. For startups, securing venture capital from influential investors is often a critical milestone. However, this relationship can also mirror Kissinger's paradox. A startup, Innovatech, receives substantial investment from a prominent venture capital firm, Tech Ventures. While the funding accelerates Innovatech's growth, it also means that Tech Ventures holds significant control over strategic decisions. When Tech Ventures pushes for aggressive expansion that strains Innovatech's resources, the startup faces the risk of overextension and failure. This scenario highlights the delicate balance between leveraging powerful partnerships and maintaining autonomy. Global perspectives. The interplay of power and dependency. Kissinger's statement also holds true on the global stage, where nations navigate complex alliances and dependencies. Small states and superpowers. Small states often align with superpowers to ensure security and economic benefits. For example, consider a small island nation that aligns closely with a superpower for defense and economic aid. While this alliance provides immediate benefits, it also means that the smaller nation must navigate the superpower's shifting priorities and geopolitical strategies. When the superpower's focus shifts to other regions, the smaller nation may find itself vulnerable and isolated. This geopolitical dynamic echoes the personal and community-level examples of dependency and risk. Emerging economies and global powers. Emerging economies often seek investment and support from global powers to drive development. Take, for instance, a developing country that relies heavily on foreign aid and investment from a powerful nation. While this support catalyzes economic growth, it also creates dependency. When the powerful nation faces its own economic challenges and reduces aid, the developing country experiences setbacks. This scenario underscores the broader implications of Kissinger's paradox on an international scale. Navigating the balance. Strategies for resilience. While the risks of dependency are evident, they do not mean that reliance on powerful individuals or entities should be entirely avoided. Instead, the key lies in navigating these relationships with awareness and strategies for resilience. Diversification of support. One of the most effective ways to mitigate the risks of dependency is through diversification. Just as investors diversify their portfolios to reduce risk, individuals, communities, and businesses should seek multiple sources of support and influence. This approach can create a more resilient foundation that is less vulnerable to the shifting priorities of any single powerful entity. Fostering independence. Encouraging independence and self-reliance is essential in personal and collective relationships. In families, fostering skills and autonomy in all members can reduce overdependence on any one individual. In communities, building local capacities and resources can create a more self-sufficient environment. In business, maintaining a level of strategic independence can prevent over-reliance on any single partner. Open communication. Transparent and open communication is vital in managing relationships with powerful entities. Regular dialogue can help align expectations, understand shifting priorities, and collaboratively address challenges. This approach can lead to more adaptive and resilient relationships. Contingency planning. Preparing for potential disruptions is a practical strategy for mitigating the risks of dependency. Whether in personal relationships, community planning, or business strategy, having contingency plans in place can provide a safety net when unexpected changes occur. Conclusion. Embracing complexity. Kissinger's statement, while rooted in the realm of international relations, offers profound insights into the dynamics of dependency and power in various aspects of our lives. Whether in personal relationships, community dynamics, business alliances, or global interactions, the balance between reliance and autonomy is a delicate dance. By understanding the risks and employing strategies for resilience, we can navigate these intricate relationships with greater awareness and confidence. In doing so, we embrace the complexity of human interactions and the ever-evolving nature of power and dependency. The double-edged sword of dependence, Kissinger's wisdom in personal and global contexts. Henry Kissinger's famous statement, "It is difficult to be an enemy of America, but fatal to be its friend," offers a profound insight into the dynamics of power and dependence. While initially applied to international relations, this observation resonates deeply in our personal lives, illuminating the delicate balance between connection and vulnerability in relationships, friendships, and business. At its core, Kissinger's statement highlights the inherent risks of relying too heavily on a powerful entity, be it a nation or an individual. While such an alliance can offer significant benefits, it can also lead to a precarious situation where one's fate is inextricably linked to the whims and priorities of the dominant party. When those priorities shift, the dependent party can find themselves in a perilous position, abandoned or even actively harmed by the very entity they once trusted. This dynamic plays out in various facets of our lives, often with subtle yet significant consequences. In the realm of personal relationships, we often witness this phenomenon in the context of unequal power dynamics. Consider the case of a young woman, Sarah, who falls deeply in love with an older, charismatic man, John. John showers her with attention and affection, making her feel special and loved. However, as their relationship progresses, John's controlling tendencies begin to emerge. He dictates her social life, criticizes her choices, and gradually isolates her from her friends and family. Sarah, initially flattered by his attention, finds herself increasingly dependent on him for validation and self-worth. When she finally decides to break free from this toxic relationship, she discovers how deeply entangled she has become in his web of control, making it incredibly difficult to regain her independence. Friendships, too, can be susceptible to this power imbalance. Imagine a close-knit group of friends where one individual, let's call him Mark, is the undisputed leader. Mark is charismatic, outgoing, and always takes charge of planning activities and making decisions. The other friends, drawn to his energy and leadership, willingly follow his lead. However, over time, they begin to realize that their own voices and opinions are rarely heard. Mark's dominance stifles their individuality and prevents them from developing their own sense of agency within the group. When one friend, Emily, finally decides to challenge Mark's authority and express her own preferences, she faces resistance and even subtle ostracization from the rest of the group, who have become accustomed to Mark's leadership. In the professional sphere, the risks of dependence can be particularly acute. Consider the case of a talented entrepreneur, David, who secures a major investment from a powerful venture capitalist, Alex. Alex's investment provides David with the resources to scale his business rapidly, but it also comes with strings attached. Alex demands significant control over David's company, influencing key decisions and dictating the direction of the business. Initially, David is grateful for the opportunity, but as time goes on, he feels increasingly stifled by Alex's interference. When David finally decides to assert his own vision for the company, he faces resistance from Alex, who threatens to withdraw his investment, potentially jeopardizing the entire enterprise. These examples, drawn from various aspects of life, illustrate the potential pitfalls of excessive dependence. Whether it's in a romantic relationship, a friendship, or a business partnership, relying too heavily on someone powerful can lead to a loss of autonomy, vulnerability to manipulation, and ultimately, a precarious existence where one's fate rests in the hands of another. However, it's important to note that dependence is not inherently negative. In many cases, interdependence can be a source of strength and mutual support. The key lies in maintaining a balance of power and ensuring that the relationship is built on mutual respect, trust, and a recognition of each party's individual needs and aspirations. Globally, we can see instances of this dynamic playing out in international relations. Consider the relationship between a smaller nation and a global superpower. The smaller nation may seek economic or military aid from the superpower, becoming reliant on its support. While this alliance can bring benefits, it can also make the smaller nation vulnerable to the superpower's influence and potentially compromise its sovereignty. When the superpower's interests change, the smaller nation may find itself abandoned or even subjected to pressure to align with the superpower's new agenda, even if it goes against its own national interests. In the realm of economics, we can observe this dynamic in the relationship between developing countries and international financial institutions. Developing countries often seek loans from these institutions to fund infrastructure projects or economic development programs. However, these loans often come with conditions, such as structural adjustment programs that can have significant social and economic consequences for the borrowing country. When the global economic landscape shifts, the developing country may find itself struggling to repay its loans and facing pressure to implement policies that may not be in its best interests. These global examples underscore the importance of self-reliance and diversification in international relations. Nations that are too dependent on a single powerful ally or financial institution can find themselves at a disadvantage when global priorities shift. Kissinger's statement, therefore, serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us of the potential risks of excessive dependence, whether in our personal lives or on the global stage. It highlights the importance of maintaining a balance of power, fostering self-reliance, and safeguarding our autonomy in all our relationships. By recognizing the double-edged sword of dependence, we can strive to build stronger, more equitable connections that benefit all parties involved. It is difficult to be an enemy of America, but fatal to be its friend. How this principle applies to personal life, relationships, and business. Henry Kissinger, the former U.S. Secretary of State, once famously said, "It is difficult to be an enemy of America, but fatal to be its friend." This statement reflects the precarious nature of alliances with powerful entities, whether nations, individuals, or organizations. Throughout history, America's allies have often found themselves abandoned when their usefulness ended. But beyond geopolitics, this principle resonates deeply in personal life, relationships, business, and social structures. This article explores how this dynamic manifests in everyday life, from individuals to families, communities, cities, and nations. It examines how aligning too closely with powerful figures, whether in friendships, romantic relationships, or business, can lead to dependency, betrayal, and even destruction when priorities shift. The principle in personal life: love, trust, and betrayal. Romantic relationships: the high cost of over-reliance. In love, many individuals find themselves in relationships where one partner is dominant. Initially, this dominance may seem beneficial, offering financial security, emotional support, or protection. However, when one person holds too much power in a relationship, the other becomes dependent. If the powerful partner's interests change, the dependent partner is often left devastated. Consider a young woman who leaves her education and career to support her successful husband. For years, she enjoys comfort and security. But one day, her husband decides he wants a different life and files for divorce. With no financial independence or personal network, she faces severe hardship. Her fatal mistake: relying too much on someone else's power. Family and friendships: the perils of favoritism and manipulation. In families, favoritism can create dangerous dependencies. The favored child often receives financial and emotional support. But this dependency can backfire if the support is withdrawn. When the parent passes away or shifts their attention elsewhere, the once favored child may struggle to stand on their own. Friendships, too, can follow this pattern. A friend with influence may help another land a job or enter an exclusive social circle. But if the friend loses interest or faces a personal crisis, the dependent individual can find themselves abandoned, their network severed. The community and village level, the consequences of reliance on a single power. Local leaders and political shifts. Communities that rely too heavily on a single leader or benefactor often experience turmoil when that figure is no longer available. Consider a small village where a single wealthy patron funds schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. For years, the village thrives. But if the patron goes bankrupt or loses interest, the village collapses due to a lack of self-sufficiency. In politics, local leaders sometimes make the mistake of aligning too closely with a powerful figure. A mayor who relies on the state governor for financial aid may find their town in ruins if a new governor with different priorities takes office. The city and state level, political alliances, and their risks. Cities that build their economies around a single industry controlled by outside forces often experience devastation when those forces change direction. Detroit, for example, relied heavily on the automobile industry. When manufacturers moved operations abroad, the city fell into economic decline, leaving thousands unemployed. States, too, suffer from over-reliance on a single benefactor. Puerto Rico, for instance, has long depended on U.S. financial aid. When economic policies changed, the island struggled to adapt, highlighting the risks of relying on a powerful ally. The national and global scale, the tragedy of America's allies. Abandoned allies in geopolitics. Kissinger's statement is most clearly exemplified in international relations. Throughout history, countries that have aligned themselves too closely with the U.S. have often suffered when their usefulness ended. Vietnam. The U.S. supported South Vietnam against the North, but when American priorities changed, support was withdrawn, and South Vietnam fell to communist forces. Afghanistan. The U.S. funded and armed the Mujahideen to fight the Soviets, only to later abandon them, contributing to the rise of the Taliban. More recently, America's withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021 left its allies in chaos. Iraq and Saddam Hussein. The U.S. supported Saddam Hussein during the Iran-Iraq War, but later turned against him, leading to his downfall. Ukraine. The U.S. has provided significant military and financial aid, but concerns remain about what will happen if U.S. interests shift in the future. How to avoid the trap of fatal alliances. Understanding this principle can help individuals, communities, and nations make better decisions. Here are a few key lessons. Self-sufficiency is key. Whether in relationships or politics, relying too much on a powerful figure or entity is dangerous. Always maintain a degree of independence. Diversify your alliances. In business, social life, and international relations, spreading your connections ensures survival if one source of support disappears. Recognize the temporary nature of power. People and nations change their priorities. Being aware of this helps in planning for the future. Invest in yourself and your community. Instead of waiting for external help, build internal resilience through education, savings, and local industry. Watch for signs of changing priorities, whether a friend, employer, or government. Understanding when someone's focus is shifting can help prepare for the fallout. Conclusion: power is fickle. Be ready for the shift. Kissinger's statement is not just about America, it is a universal truth. Throughout life, those who depend too much on the powerful often suffer when priorities change. Whether in personal relationships, family, business, or global politics, the lesson remains the same. Forge your own path, maintain independence, and prepare for the inevitable shifts in power dynamics. By applying this principle to our lives, we can navigate relationships, business, and politics with wisdom, ensuring that we are never left vulnerable when those in power change their course. Finding balance in a world of power disparities. Kissinger quote insight, while cynical on its surface, offers profound wisdom for navigating relationships at every level of human organization. From our most intimate connections to international diplomacy, the principle remains the same. Total opposition to power may be difficult, but complete dependency can be fatal. The healthiest approach in any power dynamic is to maintain enough independence to preserve your core values and identity, while engaging constructively where interests align. This balanced approach, being neither enemy nor overly dependent friend, provides the foundation for sustainable, healthy relationships across all domains of human interaction. Whether in family life, community involvement, or global politics, the lesson remains: preserve your independence, diversify your relationships, and never allow your fate to become too tightly bound to any single source of power, no matter how benevolent it may appear in the moment. What are your thoughts on this perspective? Have you experienced similar dynamics in your own life, or observed them in your community? Feel free to share your experiences and insights.